From pan-seared to grilled to sous vide, there are thousands of videos touting how to make perfectly juicy chicken breast. I myself have added a couple, but looking back on them, I kind of realized this is a terrible approach to teaching people how to cook chicken breast. Because with this approach, we often speak in general tips like you should sous vide your chicken to keep it juicy, you should brine your chicken first to keep it juicy, or maybe you should cook it to 155 degrees internal to keep it juicy. And most of this is pretty solid advice. In fact, I myself gave the recommendation to cook breast to 155 degrees Fahrenheit in my video 3 years ago, but if that's the case, then why in one of the experiments I'll show you today does the breast that I pulled off at 155 degrees Fahrenheit is much drier and has 10% less juices than the breast that I pulled off at 165 degrees? And the issue with this approach is that we never get to the core food science principles that every great chicken breast has, regardless of the technique that is used. And I want to change that in this video. For example, instead of saying insert the technique of your choice to cook great chicken breast, in this video we will be asking and answering questions such as what makes chicken breast juicy in the first place and how does it lose those juices? Then continuing on, what makes chicken taste good? And you may be wondering, why does any of this stuff even matter? Well, chicken breast is probably one of the most cooked proteins in the world these days, and also one of the least forgiving. However, once you challenge your assumptions and understand the core food science principles, you'll learn to think for yourself and unlock and exponentially increase your cooking knowledge. And my hope is that this video helps you cook not just chicken, but any cut of meat in every recipe for the rest of your life. Also, if you don't care about the why behind any of this stuff, I'll give you my basic recommendation up front. Here's how I cook chicken breast 95% of the time at home. First and most importantly, thin out the breast. Secondly, add salt at some point in the process. Thirdly, flavor with spices, marinade sauces, or herb mixes. Fourth, sear over high heat with whatever fat you have on hand. Fifth, remove at 155 degrees Fahrenheit to minimize firmness and total cook time. And then slice and enjoy. There's no special equipment, no day-long grinding necessary, it takes less than 10 minutes, and that's all you need to do to make great tasting, juicy chicken breast at home. Now you'll notice I purposely worded in some caveats in that blueprint based on what we're gonna learn in the rest of this video. And speaking of, for this video, I'm assuming that a theoretical perfect chicken breast has these characteristics. One, you want a juicy and tender interior. Secondly, well seasoned. And then third, a browned and flavorful exterior. And several years ago, I thought plain chicken breast was terrible. So I would douse it in any mix of spice rubs or sauces. But after I learned how to cook, I realized that grilled chicken with salt and a nice crust can be absolutely addictive. And your perfect chicken breast may look a little bit different than mine. You may like it a little bit more on the tender side, I may like it a little bit more on the juicy side, but using the information in this video, you'll be able to dial in the juiciness and tenderness of chicken breast exactly to your liking. Before we dive in, thank you to today's sponsor, Bright Cellars. Bright Cellars sends wine directly to your door, so you don't need to waste time at the store. And after taking a 7-question quiz, Bright Cellars will personalize and match you with wines from all around the world, curated to your taste and palate. And as someone who loves ingredient deep dives, what I love most about Bright Cellars is that each wine comes with an education card to outline tasting notes, suggested pairings, best serving temperatures, and the origin. So drinking the wine is obviously great, but it's also fun to cook with. I made a white wine pan sauce to slather over some seared chicken breast that is just spot on. Bright Cellars has a limited time offer of up to $100 off your first 4 boxes of wine, so click the link in the description to get started, and thank you again for sponsoring this video. So where does our journey start? Well, have you ever thought about why do we even cook meat in the first place? And simply put, there are really just 2 reasons. Firstly is food safety, and second is food quality, such as taste, texture, and aroma. Now this video is a deep dive on the food quality side with the juiciness and tenderness of the chicken breast, but let me quickly breeze through the safety stuff first. So what exactly makes chicken breast dangerous to eat? Well, as noted on the CDC website, chicken can be a nutritious choice, but raw chicken is often contaminated with Campylobacter bacteria and sometimes with Salmonella and Clostridium bacteria. And eating that bacteria can potentially make us sick. So how do we kill it? Through heat and cooking. The official recommendation of the USDA and CDC is that chicken should be cooked to an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. So why is this 165 degree number so special? Well, this is the temperature at which these bacteria are instantaneously killed at a 7 log reduction, meaning 1 cell out of 10 million might survive. So is reaching 165 degrees the only way to reach the 7 log reduction in these bacteria? Well, it turns out that it's not. In fact, killing or reducing bacteria is actually a product of both temperature and time. And the USDA has a table in the FSIS cooking guideline for meat and poultry products that lists out temperatures and how long that temperature needs to be held to reach the 7 log reduction of Salmonella. Since chicken breast is typically between 1 to 3% fat, this portion of the table is most relevant. But the basic conclusion is that a lean chicken breast cooked to 145 degrees and held for 8.6 minutes, or 155 degrees and held for just 45 seconds, or 160 degrees for 14 seconds, have the same 7 log reduction of bacteria as chicken breast cooked to 165 degrees. So if you want more reading, I'm going to list all of those sources down below for a little bit of extra reading. But the question is, if it's safe to cook it below 165, do we get a significant benefit from doing so? Well, as you could guess, yes. And it may have the biggest effect on both the tenderness and juiciness when that chicken breast is cooked. And here's where things get fun, because we need to figure out what even makes chicken breast juicy in the first place. As noted in On Food and Cooking, a cut of meat is made up of just 3 basic components. You have water, protein, and fat. And what's important to know is that every cut of meat and animal will have a slightly different makeup. And as noted in this article from the USDA, leaner meat and poultry contain more protein and less fat. And since water is a component of protein, but not fat, a leaner cut will contain slightly more water on a per weight basis. For example, a very lean chicken breast with no skin is roughly 75% water, 20 to 25% protein, and just 1 to 3% fat. Whereas a chicken thigh, on the other hand, no skin again, is around 70% water, closer to 15 or 20% protein, and around 10% fat. Or a well-marbled ribeye from a steak is something like 70% water, 15% protein, and 15% fat. So can you guess why this information is important? Well, the fat and water content is what creates the juices when we cook it. However, in this case, since chicken breast, because it's so low in fat, that means the juices are almost completely water. And we'll get into why shortly, but this is the reason why chicken breast dries out so easily. So if our goal is to get juicy chicken, that means we need to figure out the base principles of this question. And that is, how do we minimize water and fat loss during the cooking process? Or put another way, how do we maximize moisture retention? And to answer that, you may be wondering, where exactly is all this water in the chicken breast and how exactly does it get out? Because I can wring out a sponge and get water, I can't exactly wring out my chicken breast. So the structure of any cut of meat is generally made up of 1, muscle fibers, 2, connective tissue like collagen, and then thirdly is the fat tissue. And the qualities of the meat, such as the texture, color, and flavor, are primarily determined by the arrangement and proportion of these 3 tissues. So where exactly is the water? Well, remember being told when you were younger that humans are like 60% water, and it seemed kind of shocking at the time? Well, it's the same concept. Water is abundant in all living things, and by extension, in almost all of the foods we eat, unless steps have been taken to remove it. However, even if steps have been taken to remove it, such as dehydrating your beef jerky, this jerky may still have around 20 to 23% water left. And technically, there are two types of water in food. You have free water and bound water. Free water is freely extracted from the food. Think of pressing or squeezing a piece of citrus. And specifically in one of the experiments I did, I wet brined and dry brined 2 chicken breasts. And as you can guess, the wet brine breast actually increased in free water, while the uncovered dry brine breast decreased a few grams of the free water. And as we'll see, this can have significant ramifications on the final product, such as the interior juiciness and exterior browning, which can directly affect the flavor. So when we cook a piece of meat, you'll notice steam coming off, and this is water escaping from the food. And the free water, such as the water on the surface of the breast, will steam off first, but as the temperature of those muscle fibers rises, they actually start to tighten and constrict, pushing out the bound water. This bound water again falls into the pan like the free water does, and since water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, that rapidly evaporates via steam and is lost forever. Now, fat, on the other hand, won't evaporate like water. The little fat that is in the breast will render out from the meat and will stay in the pan, helping provide some of the juices that will still be on the surface of the meat. And hopefully those gears have started turning, and you can start to see why cooking a chicken breast is so much harder than cooking a fattier piece of meat like a steak or a chicken thigh. And even if we're cooking a very lean steak, for example, we can cook it at a much lower temperature because of the safety of the bacteria in how steak works, but since the breast is only like 1% fat and we need to bring it up to a much higher temperature, the breast juices are almost entirely reliant on the water content, and once that squeezes out, it's gone forever. So in order to optimize for water retention in the breast, we need to look at some important temperature benchmarks. From 95 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit is when the animal fats will start to soften and melt. At below 120 degrees, the chicken meat is still considered raw. At 120 degrees though, the protein myosin strands begin to coagulate, forcing that liquid out. Then at 140 degrees, remaining proteins continue to coagulate more, forcing all the liquid out. Now 150 to 155 is my preferred doneness for pan-seared chicken breast. Again, hold for 45 seconds for that 7-log reduction. 165 degrees is that instant bacteria kill zone. 212 degrees is the boiling point of water. And then the Maillard reaction or browning reaction begins slowly at around 250 degrees Fahrenheit before rapidly accelerating on the surface at 320 to 350 degrees. And for a tender and juicy chicken breast, we have to keep this principle in mind as we're cooking it. So the higher the temperature, especially above 140 degrees Fahrenheit, the firmer the muscle fibers are going to get, and the more water is going to be pushed out and evaporated, so the drier our chicken breast becomes. And if that's true, that must mean a chicken breast cooked to 140 degrees will expel less juice or water than a chicken breast cooked to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's exactly what Kenji showed in this article where he sous vide 2 chicken breasts. The 150 degrees Fahrenheit expelled nearly 2 times the amount of water. Now, what I'm about to tell you is going to confuse you, but also set us up for one of the biggest breakthroughs I think I've had when cooking chicken breast at home. So I did some testing of my own on grilled chicken breast, both cooked to 155 degrees internal. One of them ended up dry at just 79.6% moisture retention of the original weight, but the other one was nice and juicy with a moisture retention of 91.4% of the original weight. So what's going on here? Is either me or Kenji fudging the numbers? And no, we are not. We just cook them in very different ways. And like I said, the conclusion from this experiment will make the biggest difference in the chicken breast that you make at home. So I grabbed out 4 equal-sized chicken breasts, all roughly the same size by weight. 2 of them I thinned out using a knife until flat, and these ended up being roughly half the size thickness-wise. 2 of them I didn't do anything to. And I recorded the starting weight for each, and then we'll be cooking 1 thick and 1 thin breast, both to 155 degrees Fahrenheit and 165 degrees Fahrenheit. So at the stove, I laid down some oil, then seared them over medium-high heat at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. And during this time, again, I recorded the weights at starting, then pulled them off to weigh again while they cooked, and here is the graph with the weights of each. Now, looking at this, there are a couple of key conclusions. The thinned out breasts reach 155 degrees Fahrenheit and 165 degrees Fahrenheit in way less time than both of the thick breast. And the thin breasts retain much more moisture. So you may be asking yourself, is it just because these were cooked longer? Well, that's a small part of it, but this is actually still primarily due to the temperature of the muscle fibers in the chicken breast, and I hope this next set of graphics gives you the aha moment that it did for me. Remember how I said I pulled the thick chicken breast when it reached 155 degrees Fahrenheit? Well, I did do that, but I also didn't. As home cooks, when we hear cook the chicken to 155 degrees internal, I think we tend to visualize that the chicken breast is cooked to 155 degrees uniformly all across the breast like this, when that's not how it works at all when using a pan, the oven, or deep frying at high temperatures. The heat source conducts to the exterior of the chicken and then it works its way in, heating up the chicken from out to in. So why is this a big deal? Well, we have a unique problem that we need to solve because of the natural shape of the chicken breast. The chicken breast is thick at the top, but then it's slightly thicker a half an inch down before slimming down in the middle and finally to the bottom, not to mention the entire thing is rounded as well. So while the very center of the breast may be 155 degrees Fahrenheit, everything around it is going to be cooking at various rates higher than 155 degrees Fahrenheit. For example, you can see me hitting 154 degrees in the very center of the thick chicken breast. But if I pull back from the center, you'll start seeing 165 or 175, or the very edges may be all the way up to 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And the Thermoblog did a really cool test on a whole roasted chicken with 3 thermometers placed in the outer, middle, and inside breast. And just take a look at this graph where the target pool was 145 degrees Fahrenheit. It took just 40 minutes for the outer and middle breast to reach 145 degrees, while it took another roughly 40 minutes for the very inside of the breast to reach that 145 degree pool number. And the temperatures are going to be slightly different, but this exact same phenomena is happening to our bulky chicken breast on the pan, and if we visualize it, it looks a little something like this. Instead of an even 155 across the board, remember, the heat of the pan moves from out to in. So on the surface of the breast, before we even get inside, for browning, we are going to be hitting at least 250 to 320 degrees Fahrenheit. Meaning as we move just inside, that outer ring might be 180 to 200 degrees. A little further in might be 170 to 180, then 160 to 170, before finally getting to the very center at 155 degrees Fahrenheit. So yeah, I pulled that chicken breast off when it reached 155 degrees Fahrenheit internal, but in reality, the majority of this breast was cooked much higher than 155, and because of this, it had 10% less moisture than the thinned out breast. Now, when you're roasting a whole chicken, you can't really do anything with the breast, so pulling it at 145 degrees is a great technique to use, but when searing a single breast at home, we can apply and thin out the breast. And hopefully you can see why thinning is so powerful and leads to a much more juicy breast, even if you cook it at 165 degrees. By thinning out the breast, we are treating it more like a steak, which has one uniform thickness and an even surface area, so it's going to heat and cook much more evenly. So with the thinned out breast, our heat map looks a little more something like this. We are still hitting that 250 to 320 degrees on the exterior for browning, but with flipping and the even thickness, the temperatures reach much more evenly. When we add the thinned out breast to the pan, the exterior starts steaming and searing up to the same 250 to 320 degrees Fahrenheit needed for browning before moving inwards. At about 2 minutes in, almost halfway, the breast maybe hits 130 to 140 degrees in the center before we flip and go to work on the next side. Again, the heat's gonna go exterior and upward, and it starts to brown as that heat moves in, and the other side will start to rise just a bit, but not much. At 6 minutes, the center might be 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we'll do one more flip to bring it up to 155 degrees in the very center. And remember, we only need 45 seconds to hit that 7-log reduction, so you can pull it off because it should stay there due to carryover cooking. So in the final heat map, we have a piece of chicken that has more or less uniformly hit 155 degrees Fahrenheit in just 7 to 8 minutes without those wild swings in temperature due to the thick and unevenness of the bulky breast. And what this does is limit the amount of juices that were expelled out and have been evaporated away. And again, even at 165 degrees, this thinned out breast did have a little bit more moisture loss, and it's a little bit more firmer, but if you like a firm breast, this might be perfect for you. This experiment you have to try for yourself at home because it is shocking in a side-by-side taste test just how much more tender this one is compared to this one. It literally like melts in your mouth. I'm actually just salivating over this thing. So we learned what makes chicken juicy in the first place. We understand how those juices are squeezed out through cooking, and hopefully with those graphics and experiments, you understand the big picture behind moisture retention. Now, what if I told you there was an ingredient that I left out of the testing and experiments for this that can impact moisture retention? And that ingredient is salt. You may have heard over the years that brining is the secret to a moist chicken or turkey breast, but after going through all of this, my question is, how big of a difference does it actually make? Would brining for 2 hours or 24 save the thick breast, or is it a moot point that's really all about temperature? Also, what about a whole roasted chicken versus a singular breast? Well, my friends, after cooking about 15 chicken breasts this week, I think I'm gonna save those questions for another day and another video. But hopefully you have enjoyed this one, and hopefully you can implement these concepts that we covered in this video for not just chicken breast, but really any types of meat that you happen to be cooking. But anyway, that will wrap it up for me in this one. I will catch you all in the next one. Peace, y'all.